The World Sikh Organization of Canada and the National Council of Canadian Muslims, they're holding a news conference this hour to comment on the alleged assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar by agents of India. We'll listen in live.
Local law enforcement agencies were aware of the threat to Nijjar, as well as other Sikh activists in Canada, and they had been alerted of the danger from multiple sources. India cannot be allowed to disregard the rule of law and the sovereignty of foreign states. The killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and other Sikh activists were terrorist acts that must be condemned by the international community. India must honor its international obligations and cooperate with the Government of Canada in investigating these matters. The World Sikh Organization of Canada calls for the following 6 measures. Canada must immediately identify and bring to justice those individuals who were involved in the targeted killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Second, immediate protection for Sikhs in Canada who face a threat from India and its agents. Third, Canada must conduct a thorough and continuous review of all Indian diplomats and officials in Canada and immediately remove those found to have been involved in interference and espionage in Canada. Fourth, Canada must ensure heightened measures are introduced so that Indian nationals involved in that country's intelligence forces and in human rights abuses are not permitted to enter Canada. Fifth, Canada must immediately stop all intelligence sharing, including the framework for cooperation on countering terrorism and violent extremism with India. And lastly, the public inquiry into foreign interference in federal electoral processes and democratic institutions must examine India's role in foreign interference here in Canada. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning. My name is Stephen Brown, and I am the CEO of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. I'd like to start by offering my condolences to the family of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He was a person beloved to his family and his community, and he will be missed. Je voudrais commencer par présenter mes condoléances à la famille de Hardeep Singh Nijjar. C'est une personne aimée de sa famille et de sa communauté, et il va nous manquer.
And he will be missed.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister informed Canadians that our government has reason to believe that on the evening of June 18th, a Canadian citizen was assassinated by a foreign government right in front of a place of worship.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister informed us Canadians that the government has reason to believe that the night of June 18th, a Canadian citizen was assassinated by a foreign government in front of a place of worship. This is an unprecedented attack against Canadian sovereignty.
This is an unprecedented attack against Canadian sovereignty. Full stop. We're all in this together. Because when a Canadian is attacked, when he or she has the audacity to speak about human rights and justice, all of us are at risk. Now, unfortunately, the revelations yesterday were painful, but could not, for many in our communities, be characterized as shocking. We, alongside virtually every other credible expert, had warned that it was only a matter of time before the actions of the Indian government reached Canadian shores. Our jointly published report with the Sikh organization on the dangers of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS, the Indian far-right parliamentary organization, paramilitary organization that has found its ideological home in the Modi government, received national media attention. It also detailed the level of harassment already being faced by Canadian Muslim communities domestically. And unfortunately, it did not result in significant action by the federal or provincial governments at the time. Notre rapport, publié conjointement avec l'Organisation mondiale Sikh,
published jointly with the Sikh organization on the dangers of RSS, showed the level of harassment Muslim communities are confronted on a national level, and unfortunately, this has got no significant action from the federal or provincial governments.
And while the idea that the Indian government is involved in such brazen acts of violence might shock many Canadians. For millions of Sikhs, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and other minorities in India, this type of violence and utter disregard for the rule of law is an everyday occurrence. Malheureusement et tragiquement,
unfortunately and tragically, we are no longer in the time of looking.
We are no longer in Gandhi's India. This is no longer the world's largest liberal democracy. Ce n'est plus la plus grande démocratie
This is no longer the largest liberal democracy in the world.
Taken over by a far-right, extremist, paramilitary organization called the RSS. This type of impunity is not an anomaly. It is by design. C'est par conception. What we're talking about here, to be clear, is a deliberate act of violence by a foreign government on Canadian soil against one of our own citizens. This act of state-sponsored terrorism must be met with the highest response. And so today, we join the Sikh community and our partners at the World Sikh Organization of Canada in calling for action from the Government of Canada. At this moment, it is paramount that the killers of a fellow Canadian are brought to justice, and protections must be put in place immediately to ensure the safety of all Canadians from all threats, both foreign and domestic. Along with the powerful calls for diplomatic consequences, an end to intelligence sharing, and a public inquiry my colleague just mentioned, we at NCCM are calling for 4 additional actions. 1, the immediate recalling of Canada's ambassador to India. 2, an initiation of the process of expulsion of the Indian ambassador to Canada, High Commissioner Shri Sanjay Kumar Verma. 3, a formal freeze on trade negotiations between India and Canada, including but not limited to the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA. And 4, together with the WSO, we today call for the immediate banning of the RSS under the listing provisions in the Criminal Code and the removal of its agents from Canada. En français, parallèlement aux appels de mes collègues à des fortes conséquences diplomatiques,
requirements with strong diplomatic consequences after a public inquiry, we are asking for additional actions. So first, the immediate recall of the Canadian ambassador in India. 2, the expulsion of the Indian ambassador to Canada and the High Commissioner Sri Sanjay Kumar Verma, and 3, a formal freeze of commercial negotiation between Canada, including the CEPA, and with collaboration with the WSO, we are calling today for the immediate cancelling of RSS within the Criminal Code and the removal of its agents from Canada.
We must understand that this assassination of one of our fellow citizens on the streets of our country in broad daylight in front of a place of worship affects each and every one of us. Faut comprendre que cet assassinat,
you have to understand that this assassination of one of our citizens on the streets of our country in front of a place of worship affects all of us, and it's completely unacceptable.
This assassination was an attack on all of us as Canadians. This is why we must take action, and we must take action right now. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Can you clarify, are you formally accusing the RSS of murdering Singh Najar?
Pardon?
Are you formally accusing the RSS of murdering Mr. Singh Najar?
Not formally accusing the RSS of murdering Mr. Singh Najar, but what we are saying is that, and you can see this in the report that was published conjointly with the WSO, members of the Muslim community and the Sikh community and many other communities have been complaining for years that they have been targeted by harassment and threats by individuals and associations affiliated with the RSS. And for years, We've been talking about this topic to the Canadian government, and nothing has been done, which is why we are asking right now for the Canadian government to ban the RSS from Canada and expel its agents from the country.
Is there fear right now for others who are Sikh or Muslim, since there's the largest Muslim minority, I should say, in India, of further violence or being targeted? And is there confidence that Canadian officials can keep those communities here in Canada safe?
We believe that the Canadian government has the ability to keep all Canadian citizens safe. But yes, when members of the community have been talking about being targeted and discriminated against and harassed, not in India, but in Canada for years, and we can see in Canada our Prime Minister getting up in the House of Commons and saying that there is evidence, credible evidence to suggest that the agent of a foreign country is assassinating religious minorities in our country. They're killing Canadians in broad daylight in our country. It's absolutely unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And anybody would be wise to be concerned about this. Not just ethnic minorities, not just religious minorities. I mean, in Canada, if you cannot have an opinion about another foreign government without having to worry about walking outside and worrying, is there going to be a foreign agent that's going to gun you down in the streets? What's going on? So I have every confidence that the Canadian government will take all measures necessary to protect Canadian citizens.
Protection. Do you speak French?
I understand it.
Okay. Parlant de protection, vous demandez davantage de
protection, you're asking for more protection for the Sikh diaspora in Canada. What are you asking for specifically?
I'll say we are specifically asking for Sikh activists, those that are been identified as having threats. And there are a number of Canadian Sikhs that have been identified as having a threat to their life, and we are asking for the government of Canada to provide protection for these Sikhs in Canada.
Are those Sikhs approaching, is the RCMP warned those Sikhs that there's a threat to them, or is it the other way around? Is it the community asking Canadian law enforcement for protection?
I think it goes both ways, and there have been a number of cases where officials have warned them that there was a threat to their life.
How do you judge the reaction of Canadian politicians? Père Poilievre this morning said we still need to wait to have all facts before saying if the government's reaction is justified. So I think that the reaction, first of all, the approach that we're asking for is an approach for all parties. It's non-partisan. Of course, it's an incredible event, but the reality means that the Prime Minister did say that a Canadian citizen was killed by an agent of the Indian government. So I think we're calling all politicians to take this extremely seriously and to work together to ensure that all Canadians have protection, physical, but also our freedoms be protected.
The official opposition leader today suggested the Prime Minister hasn't been transparent with all the facts in this case. Do you think we need to hear more facts from the government, or what do you make of Pierre Poilievre's statement?
What I'm interested in is making sure that this is that partisan politics stays completely out of this. Right? This is a Canadian citizen, somebody with a Canadian passport that was gunned down in broad daylight. So we need to make sure that all Canadian politicians are working together to, one, understand exactly how this happened, but two, and more importantly, make sure that this doesn't happen again, that all Canadians are safe. People should not have to be worried about getting shot when they're walking out of a place of worship in Canada.
You mentioned the economic accord with India. What happens if the government continues having hope in that or doesn't remove themselves from negotiations? The fact is so serious, it is such an incredible issue that the idea itself of continuing relationships with the Indian government before
est capable, avant qu'on soit capable de s'assurer
before
que
being able
les
to
Canadiens et les
ensure
Canadiennes
that
sont sécures,
Canadians
je pense que
are safe, I
on doit mettre nos
think,
priorités à l'ordre.
you need to put your priorities straight. The government of Canada is responsible for the safety of all Canadians, and they should put all efforts in the measures to ensure protection of all communities. That should be number one priority. Then, once security is assured and all those who've committed this heinous act are, if justice is done, then we can start thinking about economic accords. But now's not the time to start thinking of treaties. You need to think of Canadian citizens.
Aware of anyone that's currently in hiding because they don't feel the Canadian law enforcement agencies or government has their backs when it comes to extrajudicial attempts on their lives?
We are aware of Canadian Sikhs that are under threat. They've been advised to make changes to their pattern of living, whether moving or otherwise. So we are aware of threats to Canadian Sikhs at the moment. Yes.
How many?
Est-ce qu'on a un nombre?
Do we have a number?
I don't have an exact number, but I can say that there are a number. I mean, so I don't have an exact number on how many are affected.
Threats personally?
I have not. No.
Who's been advising them? You said they've been advised to take precautions.
It's been a combination, as I answered before, whereas some of the community members have advised local officials of threats against their lives. Local officials have also advised some community members of some threats to their life as well.
You've both referenced the public inquiry into foreign interference. If you look at the terms of reference in terms of protections for diaspora communities, there is, a term to look at protections for those communities in the context of democratic institutions being imperiled. Would you like to see that scope expanded to look at protections for diaspora communities more broadly, outside of, election interference, for example?
That's a good question. I would tend with the news we just heard and the announcement yesterday. I think it makes sense to add that to the scope. Certainly, having a basic sense of security, I think, is a common. It's something we need to ensure in this country. And if foreign interference and foreign countries are affecting that, I think we need to look into that.
What should Canada pursue as a relationship with India? We've heard the question about the trade agreement that now is in limbo. There's a huge diaspora communities from many different minorities within India, and also the Hindus as well. So what is the future of that relationship, in your opinion?
We believe Canada needs to stand by its values and not compromise on those, whether it's freedom of expression, protection for minorities, and any relationship internationally needs to have a foundation of our core Canadian values.
What are your expectations for allies like the US and Great Britain, the allies of Canada? You said that Canada must speak about these things. So what are your expectations?
It's coming from the United States, from Australia as well. We're hoping for all the Five Eyes provide support in this. I expect that they'll see the threat that this sort of foreign interference can have on a country such as Canada and other countries of similar values. I think it's important for these countries to really identify and recognize the threat that our countries have when we deal with nations that don't share similar values, that are open to foreign interference. When we spoke about stopping intelligence sharing, and really from this Canadian Sikh community's perspective, we were expressing this concern in 2018 when that initial intelligence sharing agreement was announced. It's led to deaths in the past, intelligence sharing in Canada for Sikhs. And we are aware that this information is not used with respect to protecting minorities or protecting foreign integrity.
Do you think Canada's stuck in a bit of a bind now with India because they have emphasized an alliance with them economically so much in order to check against growing influence by China on the world stage?
I'll say I don't. In concept, we are supportive of seeking trade agreements. I think it's something that supports the economy, and every country should be seeking those. What we're not supportive of is trading lives for trade agreements for economic growth. And if we have to trade, a certain minority group to make such an agreement, I think we would be against that.
What should Canadians understand, perhaps, about the history that between India and the Sikh community, that the greater context here that you're concerned about?
The announcement yesterday, I believe, is a tip of the iceberg. This is not the first time that somebody from India an Indian diplomat has been kicked out of Canada for foreign interference on the Canadian Sikh community, and so there is a pattern here. The Canadian Sikh community has been speaking out about it for decades now, and for my part, I really resonated with what Jagmeet Singh mentioned yesterday. The younger generation that grew up in Canada, they grew up hearing stories about the persecution, about the fear of speaking out a little too much and you might get on a list or be targeted. And so to see that happening right now in 2023 in Canada, it certainly is shocking. And I hope the larger community sees that and understands how truly shocking this is, to see a Canadian attacked on Canadian soil by a foreign country. I think we can't understate how shocking that news is.
Okay, we've been listening to the World Sikh Organization as well as the National Council of Canadian Muslims reacting to the news of the alleged assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar by agents of India. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau revealed this yesterday, and they're calling for several measures. Sikhs from the World Sikh Organization, including Canada, bringing the killers to justice and also conducting a thorough investigation of its existing diplomats. The National Council of Canadian Muslims, they want Canada to immediately recall the Indian ambassador and to expel him as well, freeze trade with India, and also ban members of the RSS.